Well, I was supposed to go camping this weekend, but it seems that half the state is on fire and there's smoke everywhere. So instead, we're gathering all the friends that were supposed to go camping, and we're gonna rent a house and go hang out there with air conditioning so the smoke can't get in, and just make a nice weekend of it. And of course, I'm bringing my book, and we'll talk about this on the way. This Dune game that I recently got, I've heard good things about it. We're going to try it out. We're going to be heading up into the Sierra Nevadas, South Lake Tahoe to be more specific. And that's where we're supposed to camp anyways. So we're going to meet up and have a good time. We just found a house that'll accommodate our group. This is our Corona bubble group that has been meeting for quite some time for various events, so we feel pretty safe about going up there. One of my buddies who's coming up with this, I've known since we were in junior high, and we started reading sci-fi and fantasy books together and playing role-playing games, D&D, Vampire, Mage, and many others. And once we hit college age, or maybe just a little bit before, we started drinking as people do around that time. And we started off easy with wine coolers, mostly for the girls, and beers for the guys. But after a couple of years of drinking that, we graduated up to drinking wines and cocktails. And he is really, really good at concocting his own creations, and every time that I meet up with him, he has something up his sleeve that he pulls out that is just amazingly delicious. So I told him that I'm reading American Gods and kind of gave him the premise of the book and told him to come up with some kind of a godly or gods-related drink. So we'll see what he comes up with. I'm sure he'll come through with several variations, and I'm happy to try all of them to figure out which one is going to suit the theme of our book the best. So, American Gods by Neil Gaiman. What is it really about? Well, it's about when the gods initially came to the Americas, when people voyaged the seas and headed to this region in the first place. And when they came here, they were very powerful gods, and they had a lot of support and following. But as the years have kind of progressed, their following has diminished, and thus their power has also diminished with it. So now we find them in a state of lesser influence and lesser power, and the gods are basically trying to get by here in America. It's an interesting concept, and one that I had not read about previously, and I think it's one of the reasons that it won a Hugo and Nebula Award back when it was released. The other reason, I think, is because it does such a good job of showing America and American culture throughout the book. It is a ride-along, essentially, as our main character, Shadow, starts on the West Coast and makes his way over to the East Coast, along the way making a lot of different stops and meeting new people, and the cultures and subcultures of those regions really become evident and come to light as you're reading, and it's really fascinating to read about. Our main protagonist, Shadow, is in jail when we catch up with him, and he has a lot of plans for when he wants to get out, but those plans are basically shot to hell when tragedy befalls him, unfortunately. And I won't divulge what that is, you can read about it, but he has to find a new path, and on that path, he is met with the gods. Now, Shadow is a very interesting character because he kind of takes everything in stride. No matter what he sees along the way, he kind of just shrugs it off and moves on. And there's a lot of fantastical things that happen to him with the gods and even outside of that. And he's just like, okay, moving on. It's really interesting to read about. I've never read a character that is so basically nonchalant and just go with it. Alright, so we've settled in at our Tahoe house here. This is now day 2 that we're occupying this space, and it's been amazing. And I think it's time for us to make that themed cocktail for American Gods. And for that, I brought along my friend who is going to introduce us to something that he's created. Not sure exactly what it is. I told him that it's God related, but we'll see.
All right, so I was tasked with trying to come up with something that the gods themselves would drink. When making drinks, the key to any cocktail is effectively balance, and you can balance sweet against spicy or sour or spirits or bitters. And I figured that if we were going to create something worthy of the gods themselves, that we would try to balance as many of those things into a cup as we can. First of all, you want a shaker that has a small and a large shaker that fit into each other, especially for purposes of this drink. Into this cup, the smaller cup, we'll start mixing our actual ingredients. Into the larger cup, we'll put our ice. Don't want to put the ice there for now because it'll start to melt earlier. So let's talk about our ingredients. First, I wanted to start with a little bit of vodka. Now, I chose vodka in this particular instance because we're going to get most of the flavors for the cocktail out of the other ingredients. And we want something that brings some of that alcohol flavor without having a flavor that interferes with the other ingredients. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pour 3/4 of an ounce of vodka. All right, so 3/4 ounce of vodka goes into our small shaker with no ice. Our next ingredient will be mead. Many of you might be familiar with this, but mead is essentially a wine that's made of honey. And I figured, what else would be worthy of a drink of the gods other than to have literally liquid honey in their drink?
Now, is this a common ingredient to actually make cocktails with, or is this something that you just kind of came up with, or what's the thing behind that?
That's a very good question. Actually, no. Mead is highly uncommon to make for purposes of cocktails.
All right.
It is unusual to find. I have actually never seen it used in a cocktail before. But what we wanted to do is add a sweetener to our cocktail. And in this instance, this will not only give a sweetness like a simple syrup might, but it'll actually give you a depth of honey flavor that I thought would be fitting for this cocktail.
I like it. All right.
So into our jigger then goes 1.5 ounces of mead. And that we then transfer into our small shaker. For our next ingredient, we're going to use another liqueur that is also fairly unusual. This is Dillard's Rose Liqueur. This is effectively the essence of rose, added with sweetness and with a depth of flower to it that you actually don't find in most other ingredients. Because it's particularly strong, you don't want to add a lot of it. It will tend to overpower whatever else you use. So into our jigger goes then only 1/4 ounce of the rose liqueur.
Okay, that small amount.
That's small amount. You will taste it as one of the primary ingredients in this.
All right.
That also goes into our shaker. So, to recap so far, we have added spirits, we have added sweetness, and a second layer of sweetness that is actually also going to bring some depth and complexity. One thing missing from this is our final ingredients, which is bitters. This is a cherry bark vanilla bitters.
Now, if they're not able to find this particular bitter,
Yes.
is there something they can substitute that is going to give them a similar flavor profile?
Yes. So the reason we're using this bitters is because it brings a little bit of earthiness from the cherry bark and a little bit of warmth from the vanilla. Now, if you can't find this, actually a little bit of vanilla extract would probably do the trick as well. And in the alternative that, I would actually switch to a more fruit-based type of bitters like an orange bitters. I would actually probably do just as well.
Okay.
All right, now here, we're just going to use 4 drops. And for a final ingredient that provides flavor to this drink, we're going to add about 1/2 of a lemon, which should come out to roughly 1/2 of an ounce. And now, the lemon juice also goes into our drink.
All right. Well, that sounds excellent. As you can see, I brought the right guy along. This has been awesome. I can't wait to taste this. So let's finish it up here.
All right. Now, in our final ingredient, which is actually not a flavor ingredient, but it is in fact one for the appearances of the drink. And you also have used this in the past before, although you use a slightly different color. We're going to be using edible glitter once again for our drink. However, in this instance, we figure what else is worthy of the gods but liquid gold itself. So we will reach in here, we will pick out a little bit, and we will dump it into our drink. Now, the less you put, the more translucent it will be and the less gold. And the more you put, the converse. It'll become more and more gold. We're going to add a little bit more.
Extra godly.
Extra godly. So now that we have this, we give it a little swirl, and we look to see whether we like the gold content. In our separate shaker, which has been sitting here empty all along, we will take our ice and we'll pour it in. Now, the reason we have these in two separate containers is because if you put the gold dust, the gold glitter, into the container with the ice, it'll actually get absorbed by the ice and not by the drink. So you want it in here so that it mixes with your drink before you add it to the ice.
So you're saying it sticks to the ice and it might clump?
Yes, it actually does clump. I have experimented with it a couple times. It does not end up well.
Okay.
All right, and so from one into the other we go. And the small shaker comes directly on top, and then you shake it. A good rule of thumb is about 10 to 12 seconds. Now we want our drink in our glass, and obviously we'll have to strain it. So we use our strainer on top and our finer strainer on bottom, and into our glass goes our drink.
Now, interestingly, it doesn't look like we strained out the gold because that looks really, really shiny.
That's correct. You can see that we caught some of the ice here, but the gold glitters are far too small to be caught.
Awesome. That looks delicious. Now, what are we calling this drink?
Yes, so we figured a drink worthy of the gods themselves must be the nectar of the gods, and henceforth, the nectar of the gods.
All right, so let me give it a taste here. Wow, there's a lot going on in there.
So hopefully what you're picking up now is a little depth of that mead for the sweetness, so you're getting a little of that honey flavor, you're getting a little of depth from the flowers of the rose liqueur, a little touch of that citrus from the lemon juice, and then a little touch of that bitter, so it should come across perfectly balanced, and it should be flowery and sweet, and a little bitter and a little bit sour, and it should hopefully be tingling all the taste buds in your mouth at the same time.
All right, a drink definitely worthy of the gods. I encourage you to make this one at home. Some of the ingredients might be a little bit tough to find, but I'll link them below so you can get them. And have fun with this one. Thanks again for making this. This is going to be one that I think I want to make again at home when we get back.
Excellent, it's been my pleasure.
All right, cheers guys. Every time you take a sip, it's kind of shining at you a little bit.
It's coming towards you.
Oh, shoot.
Don't turn your back.
Oh, no.
Don't turn your back.
Remember, Sam, you don't have to outrun the bear. You have to outrun Ashley.
It's coming here.
Well, that was a lot of fun. What's better than hanging out with a bunch of really close friends in a house in the middle of the woods and basically eating and drinking and playing games for a weekend? Nothing really. During that time, I did get a chance to do a little bit of reading and finished off this book, and I have some thoughts about the writing and the writing style of Neil Gaiman that I think you should be aware of. Neil Gaiman writes beautifully. Really, there's no arguing against that. His writing is essentially poetic, but not just for the sake of being poetic or to describe random things that you don't need to know about, but really to get his point across, to send his message to the reader. The thoughts kind of flow from his mind onto the page and into yours as you're reading it. And if you have not read Gaiman, I recommend you give it a try. You may not think it's your style, but the storytelling is superb. He does, after all, teach a master class on storytelling online that you could sign up for. If you are going to read this, I would say go into it with zero expectations as to what's going to happen, because whatever you think is going to happen is going to be wrong. And secondly, just go along for the ride. Just read it for the sake of reading it and enjoying a story. Alright guys, that is the American Gods video. I recommend you go pick this book up and just give it a shot. Give Neil Gaiman a shot and see how it goes. You might fall in love with his writing style. Come hang out with me on social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm always active on there. And don't forget to check out my Patreon if you want to help support the channel to make better videos. Thanks to Liza Day and Ray Ray, my first 2 patrons. Appreciate your support. I just posted a blooper video of the first few videos that I made, so go check that out on Patreon as well. And I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.